5-year-old son, because we were living in Ireland, and in those days we didn't know of any books on dowsing or anything like this at all. But we had a little family ritual because we were Mickey Mouse farming down in the southeast of Ireland. And unfortunately, we found that Mickey Mouse farming didn't always provide enough breakfast for the entire family. So I had to go overseas from time to time to do some consultant work. I was originally trained as a scientist, and I ended up as a tropical agronomist. But what was important was when I came home, the rule of the house was that I had to give attention and time to our little 5-year-old because he was the youngest. And otherwise we had daddy, 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 daddy going on, and I couldn't talk to anybody. So I was instructed by my wife that I had to focus on the youngest first, and then everything will be peaceful. Once his demands were satisfied, we could then have a conversation. So the first time after I was introduced to these new rules, when I came back, I was greeted at the door by this little imp saying, "Daddy, I want a chainsaw." Whereupon my eyes rolled, and my wife said, "No, no, listen to what he wants." So he took me by the hand across to our implement shed, and there on the bench he had a block of wood and a piece of rope and a piece of wood for the blade. And he told me I wanted that fixed there, that fixed there. And he was very happy with this block of wood, and he went off and started slashing all the bushes. So that was fine. The hedge cutter for his little tractor took somewhat longer on another trip. But the trip in question, I came back, and it'd been quite tricky. And I was very pleased to arrive. Normally the family would meet me off the train, but in this case I didn't know when I was coming back. So I came down with a disgruntled Dublin taxi driver who didn't really like to go out into the country. And anyway, I assured him that the bridge, Kilcarry Bridge over the River Slaney, was where I wanted to be. And I got out of the taxi and threw my case into the ditch, because in Ireland that's what you could do. Nobody would touch it, so I knew that would be all right for a couple of days. And I could just walk in alongside the river and enjoying the summer and the water and the birds and the light, and thinking, oh, it's air conditioned, this is lovely. Anyway, I got to the door, and I was met at the door with this little imp clutching 2 pieces of bent cleaning hanger. And he said, "Daddy, hold these." So Daddy obliged and held these. "Daddy, follow me." So I followed him through the house. And we got into the sitting room, and the rods just crossed over. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting, Ronan. What does that mean?" "Water, Daddy." "Oh, right. I wonder which way it's flowing." Whereupon both rods went to one side. So I said, "Oh, interesting." Because it was an old mill. The river was flowing by outside. There was only one way it would be flowing. And he said, "Follow me." So I followed him through to the end room, and which used to be our oldest son's bedroom. And the rods took off going backwards vigorously. And I said, "Ooh, what's that, Ronan?" He said, "Good, Daddy, same like man." So I said, "What man?" "Ask Mummy." So I wandered through to the kitchen to find my wife laughing her head off, pouring me out a large whiskey. And she said, "Before I say anything, you better go upstairs and see what the sleeping arrangements are." "Sleeping arrangements?" So I went upstairs, and I was relieved to see that our bed was still in the same place, but the children were put into one bedroom together. And the whole of the top of the house had been carpeted in red. So I screamed a little and then came downstairs and said, "Why red? You don't like red, you told me that." "No, but Mr. Hill said we should do that." I said, "Who's Mr. Hill?" And she said, "Well, you know that Rupert, that was the eldest, he seemed to be getting sicker and sicker. And you'd say now that he was starting ME, but in those days they didn't have a name for it. the doctor called it malingering. And my wife knew that he was keen to get to school and all the rest of it, so said, well, that's not the case. And she was talking with one of our nearest neighbours, Chrissy B. Now, Christabel Bienenberg was quite a powerful lady. She'd written the book, The Past is Myself, which was about being an English woman in Berlin during the war. And her husband got arrested for trying to blow up Hitler, and but she talked him out, had demanded an interview with the Gestapo and threatened the Gestapo, so they released him. But anyway, she was a fount of all local knowledge, and as they were now nearest neighbours, and they did have a swimming pool, which the husband heated reluctantly because he put in the pool and heated it for his wife's rheumatism, but he felt it was silly just to heat a big pool just for one dame. So he was delighted when Veronica and the kids would go across and swim. Anyway, part of the ritual was after a swim to sit down and have an evening drink with them. And Veronica was talking to her about Rupert and the doctor's prognosis, and she said, Dickie, if I were you, I'd go and see Mr. Hill. So Veronica had asked the obvious question, who's Mr. Hill? Well, he finds water. He's a dairy farmer. He lives just down the road, and I had him in to check where I was sleeping because I couldn't sleep. And he said, I was sleeping on water, just moved my bed across the room, and she said, I'd sleep like a baby. And so Veronica said, okay, she would call in. So she called in on Mr. Hill, who was milking his cows, and said, would you come down and check my house? I'll be down after the milking, he said. And he came down, checked the house, and said, who's sleeping in this bed? And she said, well, my oldest son, that's why I actually called you. And he said, well, if he continues to live there, he'll become seriously ill. He's sleeping on polluted underground water with lead and copper and iron and all sorts of stuff there. Put him upstairs because we had a shortage of rooms, put him upstairs with the other boy and carpet the whole of the top of the house with red, which will protect you all. And that was the advice. So Veronica quite reasonably said, why red? He said, I don't know, but it works. So, but he said, before you buy the carpet, get a piece. And so she went along to Carla and got a piece from the carpet place and went along to Mr. Hill, and he came out from his milking and said, right, this is the signal I get walking over my well. Very clear. Put it down there and I'll walk across again. No signal. He said, yes, that'll do nicely. It took us many, many years. In fact, we were doing oral workshops across in England when we moved back across many, many years later that we found out why. Because what happens is that when you sit on geopathic stress or polluted underground water, you pump a lot of red into your aura from your base chakra. You're just putting all this red in. And after a time, it gets depleted. And when it's depleted, your body breaks down at its weakest point. So you get whatever your weakest point is, and it gets hammered. And we only found this out because we were doing an aura workshop, and so we had asked an aura photographer to come along with a Polaroid camera and a computer-enhanced system, which showed the colours of the aura. My wife's aura was very nice and colourful and so on. But after we'd done everybody else's auras and they had dowsed them and we'd been playing all day, I then said, can we do one more experiment? Veronica, will you please just sit in that chair and imagine you're sitting in 1973 on the bed where our oldest son slept. And she said, yes, I can do that. And I said, well, take a photograph, please. And he took a photograph, and her aura changed from this beautiful rainbow color into just one of pure red, where she was putting red out into her aura. And we realized then what the red carpet was doing. It was replacing the red, which otherwise would be lost. And so you don't get your red depleted and your body doesn't break down. Anyway, So that was how I got shown how to use a pair of dowsing rods. So immediately after I drank my whiskey and had a bit of a gossip, I rushed out into the garden and said, I'm going to find some water. And because we had water delivered to the house from a well which we had drilled when we first moved in, because originally the water was just pumped from the river, but with young children and having odd animals floating down in the river, we said we must get a better potable source. So we got hold of the local well driller by the name of Murphy Flood, and I said to him, well, where do you choose to drill? And he said, in Ireland you don't need to bother, you just drill until you hit water. I said, how do you charge? Well, he said, by the foot. And anyway, you're alongside the river, it can't be too long. Anyway, it took days. And after a time, I went up and said, how deep are you now? He said, well, 90 feet. And the river was only about 10 feet below the entrance to the house. And I said, well, have you got water yet? Oh, yes, we've had water since about 30 feet, but we thought we must give you enough depth. I said, could you stop now? So they hauled up the rig and got out of the place, and we paid them off. But the water was potable, but it discoloured the bath. It was always stained with this green, blue tide mark. In fact, it eventually discoloured the bath permanently. So I wanted to have clean water for my whiskey in the evening, so I went off to find, and I found a little place in the garden where the rods crossed. So I put a pebble there and said, right. And I said, what are you going to do now? I said, I'm going to see Mr. Hill. So I went off to Mr. Hill and said, would you come down and find us some water? He was quite a fellow. He found the master's son when he disappeared and said he'd be on the third bend of the river stuck in the roots of the tree, you know. So they were able to bury him within the 3 days, which you like to do in Ireland. And he came down, went around, and he said, well, the best place is here. And it was just above my little pebble. So I said, oh, good, because that's where I'd found. And he said, well, how deep is it? I said, I don't know. So he said, well, it's 12 feet down. And I said, how do you do that? And he said, well, is it more than 10 feet? Yes, no. And so he explained to me how you got the depth. Of course, I didn't ask whether there would be anything in the way. So we then got the local grave digger, because it was summer and he had spare time, and asked him to dig us a well. The idea being you take the bucket and you put a bottle of beer in and drill it to the hole. He drinks the beer and fills up the bucket with soil. And so we went on. But after a very short time, we came to a stone, which was about that size. And it was only about 3 feet down. He said, what do we do now, sir? And I said, well, the water must be underneath it. We better go round it. So he carried on digging. And we ended up with instead of a little well, we ended up with a grave that around. And at the bottom was this nice spring, which we put in a little pump, and it was just enough for the outside of the house. We put it on outside the house. So if anybody wanted a glass of water, we'd just go and take that. And we used the rock as the floor of our future wine cellar. So that we made use of it. Anyway, that's how I started dowsing. But my wife had started a little bit earlier. When we moved to Ireland, she had migraines. Never had migraines before, and the migraines got worse and worse until she was having migraines for about 3 weeks out of 4. And the doctor put her on morphine, that made everything worse. And so he said, well, you better go up to Blackrock Clinic. So she went off to the Blackrock Clinic, which is equivalent to Harley Street, because in Ireland in those days you paid for your medical stuff. A visit to the doctor was £6. And 2 specialists discussed Veronica's case, gave her something like beta blockers or something, and she drove the car back and nearly wrote it off. So she stormed into the kitchen, throwing the pills into the bin, and saying, well, that didn't work. Well, what do we do now? So I said, well, why don't we go and have a swim? So we went off to our neighbours, the Bienbergs, And again, Veronica was chatting to Chrissy B, this was earlier, and she said, Dickie, why don't you go down to Mr. Thackeray? And she said, well, who's Mr. Thackeray? Well, Mr. Thackeray was a retired farmer, and he used a big plum pendulum over a ledger, and in those days it wasn't fashionable to breastfeed, so they had all these mothers going with these colicky children who were being fed on powdered milk, and it seemed to help. Anyway, Veronica went to see him and explained her problem, and nice kitchen, Mr. Thackeray with his Irish raincoat, bit of binder twine around the middle, his wife banging around in the kitchen, keeping an eye on him because he had to hold Veronica's hand. And in those days, Ireland hadn't really encountered the miniskirt, and Veronica always wore miniskirts, so she was very disapproving of Mrs. Thackeray. Anyway, he held her hand and went through and said, well, it's very easy, you just cut out bread and milk, there's a couple of other things, and you won't have any more migraines. So she thought this was a big joke, but there was a little donation box, so she took out a £20 note and put it into the box, whereupon she became Mrs. Thackeray's best friend, because the locals just would put in a couple of coins. And she came back and said, well, I tried everything else, I may as well try that. And didn't have any more migraines. And we had a lot of visitors because we'd been out in the tropics and come back, so we had a lot of catching up to do with family and friends. And we had a stream of visitors coming from Germany and Switzerland and from France and from England, and they all had something wrong with them. So Veronica took them off to Mr. Thackeray, and they all got better. So this was wonderful. Anyway, sometime later, I said to Veronica, what are you doing today? She said, I'm going to the supermarket in Carlo. And I said, well, I'm going up the field. So I got on my tractor and went up the field, and she went off to the supermarket. And when I came back at lunchtime, hoping to find some lunch maybe ready, Veronica only then pulled into the yard, and I laughed and said, conversation, because you always have conversation in Ireland. The first time we bought an ice cream, it took 40 minutes. We had to eat it in the shop, because they were so interested to ask questions and things. And she said, no, it's just total frustration because she's trying to read the small print. But in those days, not everything was labelled properly. So I'm going to see Mr. Thackeray and get him to show me how to do this. I said, brilliant. So she went off and came back looking very dejected. So I said, what's up? Well, she said, I asked Mr. Thackeray, and he was very nice, but he said, well, it's a gift from God now, and I can't be passing that on now, can I? So she said, what could I say? I just smiled sweetly and said, thank you. I said, okay, well, let's look at this thing the other way around. What is so special about Mr. Thackeray and not you? Stay there. So I went off to the tractor shed and got a tractor nut and a piece of string and brought it back and said, Veronica, hold that over some fruit. And it went clockwise. And I said, well, take that as your yes. And hold that over some bread, because I was still having bread toast in the morning. And it went the other way. So take that as your no. And that's where we all started. We had nobody to talk to. We just started. But before long, we found we were sitting in front of a computer that would answer any question you like to ask, as long as there was a need to know. If there was no need to know, we didn't get the answer, or correct answer. And so that's where we started out. So, many years later, though, with the dowsing, it was quite useful. Veronica, we didn't even call it dowsing because we didn't know the name of it. We used to call it something like using a pendulum or something anyway. But we were conscious that we had a ghost in the house, so Veronica got into conversation with the ghost. And it didn't want to go, it was there to help us. And at this time, we were noticing that all electrical stuff that we had always expired within warranty. In fact, Bosch in Dublin would, as soon as they saw us come into the yard, they would say, "Oh no, not you again." And it would seem to be just us, because every piece of equipment we had always expired well within its warranty. And it was only when we were fixing up some irrigation from the river that we noticed that brand new pressure switches weren't working. It took 7. It was only the 7th one that worked. And this was so odd. I said to Veronica, "There's something strange going on. Can you see what you get?" And about a day later, she came back and said, "Yes, we have to do something. There's a curse on the place, and it goes back to Oliver Cromwell's days. And a whole village had been ambushed in the shallows because there used to be a ford just below the house. And men, women, and children were slaughtered, and the river ran. They still talked about the river running red with blood." So we did a little ceremony on the side, didn't ask any priest or anything, on the side of the bank, and did what the ghost had suggested. And that field was a particularly nice alluvial soil, and we had planted daffodil bulbs to hit the early market, to bring a little bit of breakfast in. And we had got these nice bulbs from Holland, and the first year they came up, they were yellow and stunted. Now, bulbs you can just put into sand, so there was no toxicity in the soil. We checked that, did all the tests. The bulb guy came and had a look, and he couldn't work it out either. But when we cleared this curse, they came up the next spring, bright green, with the biggest daffodil flowers we've ever seen. And we phoned up to the man in Holland and told him, and he said, "I don't believe it, but I must." So that rather set us on our way. Subsequently, we heard that there was going to be a conference at York University being run by the British Society of Dowsers. My wife found this out when she was across on one of her floristry expeditions. So she said, "We have to go." And I said, "Oh, yes." "Right, you go." "No, you go. You go." I said, "All right, you douse it." So she doused it, and I had to go. And I said, "Well, will you douse my route, please?" So she doused the route. It was a very strange one. It was up through the north and back down south rather than going up through the busy roads. And she said, "When do you want to arrive?" And I said, "In time for the supper on the Friday evening, because I'll be famished." So I arrived about 5 minutes to supper time on the Friday evening with a very uneventful trip, very nice. And I went up to the food, and I was going over the food, saying, "Shall I eat this? Shall I eat this?" and so on. And somebody next to me said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm dowsing my food." "Oh, we don't use it for that." I said, "Well, what do you use it for then?" And he was an archaeologist, so he was interested, and somebody else was interested in something else. So when I took my food and sat down at the table, I asked around the table what everybody uses their dowsing for, and was surprised to find that it was always something very specific, whereas we were using it for everything. And I said, "Well, that's interesting." And then a very grumpy fellow turned up, really miserable. And I said, "What's up with you?" And he said, "Well, we've come from the furthest anywhere in the country, and we've missed the supper." And I said, "Well, why didn't you douse it before you came?" "Don't use dowsing for that." And I said, "Well, we did, and I come from Ireland, which might be a little bit further than Kent." So when I came back, I said to Veronica, "You know, I think we might have something we could pass on to other people. But we won't do this in Ireland because we had our local dowsers and we didn't want to upset They've been very helpful to us, and we didn't want to upset anybody because we were blow-ins. They were local. And although the local Garvey sergeant told me when we were going up to lobby the Ministry of Fishing because the river had been interfered with, and we wanted to put in a fish pass. And they said, "Well, we better go up and lobby the minister." And I said, "Well, count me out, because I won't be popular." On the contrary, you can speak for the Anglo-Irish. You have to come anyway. You're an honorary Irishman, which I found very strange, but very nice. And we went up and we got a good hearing and we put in the fish part, but that's all beside the point. Now, so this was where we started. And 40 years later, there's a distillation of some of the things we've found out in the books at the back there, which if you want to buy them later, you're most welcome. At the back of the book, there's a whole list of checklists, which we developed to go so you can check out whether it's ancestral stuff or whether it's food or whatever it is. These are just a guide. They're not the final thing because you'll make your own. I always recommend you make your own. And before I forget it, the most important question you need to ask, I'm sure you all know it, other, the question you haven't thought of. Other, very important. Right, now I'm going to tell you about one or two little cases we've had to deal with and strange things that happen. We notice that after a time, the more you dowse, the more you're using it, that things start to happen in a rather strange way. When I started off, I had to drive to Dublin quite often, usually twice a week. Very boring. And the road had a camber which was like this, so you wanted to be in the middle. Now you've got European roads from the EC, which are marvellous. Beautiful roads, nobody on them. But then you had to get in the centre because otherwise you slid into the ditch. But when you came, the roads were bending, so coming around the corner would be somebody else doing the same. So I thought, well, it is useful to know if somebody's coming around the corner before we get there because I can get off the centre and not slide into the ditch. So I imagined a pendulum in my mind as I was driving. And I would ask, now, is there a vehicle coming around the corner? No. And I come around the corner and find there will be a bike or something like this. I thought, okay, I have to be specific. And in the end, after 2 or 3 years, I found that I could tell whether there was an articulated truck, whether it was a red one or a yellow one or what it would have written on the side, or whether it's a car and so on. It became very, very useful. When we moved across to England, we started to talk to people about dowsing, and we started running courses. And one day I suddenly couldn't get a signal with my pendulum, which was one of Veronica's rings with a bit of cord, or my dowsing rods, which were just brazing rods bent into an L with a bit of bamboo as a sleeve. And I said, what do you get? And she said, well, you've just got to dowse another way. And I said, well, how? I said, I don't know. But anyway, fortunately, she went off to support a friend of ours, Dan Wilson, down in Kent, in Ashford, and he was giving a workshop on toolless dowsing. So using your primary sense to get your dowsing signal. And she, amongst the systems, was blink dowsing. And apparently Dan had taken 18 months to learn how to blink dowse. So I said, what's that? She said, well, look at the ceiling, see how many blinks you get, and ask for a yes, and ask for a no, and see how many blinks you get. In my case, it was very easy because I get a blink with one eye and a blink with the other eye for yes and no. And I said, oh, that's useful. And subsequently, we went on with this further, and we used to do workshops showing people how to dowse and so on, using no tools at all, which is very useful if you want to go into a holy place or anything like this, because you don't want to upset people's sensibilities. It's much better you can just feel those energies. But I usually start beginners' workshops now with dowsing with the body, just asking people just to stand up and say, well, please show me a yes, and they usually go forwards or backwards and the no is the reverse. And they have a signal straight away, and that stops any blocks coming in the way and helps them get on with their dowsing if they want to use the pendulum or anything else. However, let's give you a few examples of odd things. One particular odd thing, which I'll tell you now, is probably completely out of context, but Veronica used to see a lady in the College of Psychic Studies, where I still do workshops. And this lady would come in a taxi. She had a pacoon-type coat on and a pair of slippers, even in the pouring rain. And she'd have the taxi running for an hour and a half outside while she had a consultation with Veronica. And the lady looked so poor, and Veronica was very concerned about this, her wasting her money, but she wanted the taxi waiting. It was only some time later when Veronica was invited to a house which she was selling to a Russian oligarch in those days for 7 million, which is probably now about 14. She was a very wealthy woman, but she was careful with what she spent it on. Anyway, I was talking with her and said, oh, I haven't heard from this lady in a long time. I wonder what happened to her. And so we discussed her, and that didn't say anything else. Next day, her son phoned up and said, did they owe anything? Did Mummy owe anything? And we said, no. And I said, well, why are you asking? And he said, well, you know Mummy's died. You were at her funeral. And I said, no, I wasn't at the funeral. Yes, you were. The funeral was 2 days ago, and you were on the other side of the grave, and I recognized you, and you recognized me, and you were there. I hadn't left. I hadn't been in London. Curious, very curious. You talk about something, and you're, in effect, there. So it's really down to quantum physics. This is why you can dowse at a distance, because when you're dowsing at a distance, you're actually there. And this is why you need to ask your can I, may I, should I, because if you don't, you'll get knocked off your chair like I was. Veronica had just written her book, and she said, what now? And I said, well, it'd be rather nice if we got a write-up or something. And I think she may have sent a copy to the Farmers Weekly, because we were on a little farm. And in the Farmers Weekly, there's a women's section, all about tractors and everything else, but there's always a section for the family in the middle. And a journalist came from Farmers Weekly with a photographer, and Veronica was explaining about geopathic stress and other things, and the photographer suddenly said, oh, would that explain why my little girl won't sleep in her bed? She always comes to our bed. I said, could be. Just sketch out do a rough plan of your house and write the address. And I was listening to Veronica, but maybe to demonstrate sort of the effect of I didn't ask, can I, may I, should I, which gives you the protection. So I just dowsed over it. Wham! I was prostrate on the kitchen floor, knocked out of the chair, really shaken, and they said, what's that? And I said, that's the energy in your little girl's room. Oh my goodness, why is that? And I said, well, it's Cotswold stone, which is limestone. There's an underground stream. It comes along, and underneath your daughter's bed, there's a waterfall which goes down about 100 feet. And the energy is being taken like that. So please don't let that little girl go in there. And they said, well, we were thinking of selling anyway. And I said, well, fine. Otherwise, just use that as a guest room, because the guests won't stay too long. And so that seemed to be the solution. Right. What shall we talk about? Curses? All right. I used to practice in the Hale Clinic, just off Regent's Park. And Veronica had a great friend from South Africa, and who used to organize workshops for Veronica to give in Mossyman's, the upper deck of the restaurant in the West End of London. Anyway, when I was going to practice there, Veronica said, well, she'll go and visit her friend. So The two ladies would then douse all sorts of things. I'd do my work and then come back. And they always got on extremely well. They decided to move back to South Africa to retire. And they went back and they were very happy. They sent us pictures of their nice house and everything was super, and she was doing a lot of charity work and everything was going along very well. But one day she phoned up Veronica and said, could you check what's happening with her father? Because she said, I know Daddy's dying. He's on very heavy cortisone, heavy steroids and all sorts of stuff. We don't expect him to last more than a few weeks. But he was attacked today by his own dog, by a black snake, and a black dog. And she said, that can't be the three things in the one day. There must be something involved. Could you see what you get? So we sat in the kitchen working on this. It took us a good day, but it was absolutely fascinating. We found eventually through yes and no, that there was a curse which had been put on her daddy 20 years previously. And we dowsed that he'd sacked his cook for stealing sugar. Now in Africa, everybody gets a sugar ration if they're in the house, but he was selling sugar from the store wholesale. So every month he got through a whole sack, about 100 weight of sugar. And they said, well, this is unreasonable. He has to go. Now the cook thought this was very unreasonable, understandably, different set of values. And so he went along to the shaman, the witch doctor, and said, he probably paid him in sugar, and said, please would you put a curse on the boss who just fired him? So the shaman said, yes, okay. And that was the curse that was still running. So we then said, oh, this is going to be tricky. Is the shaman or the witch doctor, is he still alive? No. And I said, well, thank goodness for that. That makes life a bit easier. So can we communicate with him? Yes. Right. Can we made sure our protection was okay. Can we please ask him very politely to lift the curse? It's been 20 years now. Nope. Came back. And it went on. We were negotiating. No, nothing. And so I said, well, we need a little bit of help here. So I said, could we have a bit of a tough militant angel, please? Would you please pick up the energy of the witch doctor? I mean, it said to a witch doctor, who was then in the hand of the angel, well, would you please lift the curse? Nope. So we then asked the angel to give the witch doctor a little squeeze. Nope. So I said, well, could you give him a squeeze like you would squeeze a mouse and the eyes would pop out? And whereupon the witch doctor said, okay. And he said, really? Yes. He said, I'll lift it. Okay, thank you very much. We thought we were going bonkers. I said, Veronica, just phone your friend and tell her we've done something. Don't say what, and see whether anything's improved. So she phoned her friend, told her, and she said, well, I'll get back in touch. And a week, 2 weeks later, a phone call from South Africa again. Veronica, you're a miracle worker. And Veronica said, why? Daddy's doing laps of the pool. Right. And Mummy's stopped drinking. And we said, well, Veronica said, I didn't know your mother drank. Oh, yes, she's been an alcoholic for 20 years. So then Veronica said, well, in that case, I can tell you what it was. So she explained, and then there was a gasp at the other end. Oh, that's why the brothers never succeeded at business. They would get so far with the business and never get the deal. That's very useful. And then we worked out that she had left South Africa before this happened. So she wasn't included in the general curve. So I went back to the witch doctor to say thank you very much, and that was really very nice of you, and we were sorry to put pressure on you. And whereupon we got a message back, which took quite a long time to work out. You know how to get a message, don't you? You know, is it something to know, something to do, or something to ask? Is it on a physical level, is it an emotional level, or a psychic level? And then you ask for help, who's going to help with this? And then you get the dictionary and go through and find keywords which give you a clue. And anyway, we worked out that the witch doctor owed us one because we had shown him that we could overcome him. Therefore, he was obliged to help us if we had any other similar case. So I thought, well, that was very nice. Is that how the universe works? Yes. And by the way, you're never given anything that you can't deal with. That's also another rule of the universe. And so we said, oh, that's useful. Didn't think any more about it. Until a few weeks later, we'd been helping 3 Anglo-Irish girls who were in England. They had all sorts of things with schools and children, and we'd helped with finding the right school and all sorts of things. But anyway, they said, Mummy has a problem. Can she phone you? I said, of course. So Mummy phoned from County Wexford and said, my husband is not the easiest to live with at the best of times. He's a retired naval captain, but he has these boats and they go out fishing, and he has this one boat, and it's a nice boat, but whenever he goes out on that, his clients never catch a fish. So I said, send us a picture of the boat, the name and so on. And by the way, where did you buy it? Oh, he bought it in West Africa. I said, West Africa for Ireland? Yeah, well, it was cheap and it was very good. So we dowsed that actually the boat was cursed, and that's why it was so cheap. And it had been cursed by a Cameroonian witch doctor. Now, those are the ones who wear all these face masks and do, you know, lots of rattles and wonderful stuff. So I said to Veronica, Crump, they speak a very funny French down there, don't they? And I tell you what, let's see if we can enlist the South African witch doctor. So I spoke to the South African witch doctor and said, could you help us with a colleague of yours? He's in Cameroon, and we explained everything. He said, oh yes, leave it to him. And we did. And then we phoned up the wife and said, well, we've done something, but we won't tell you what we've done, but just tell us if there's any change. 2 weeks later, we got a press cutting from the Irish Times of the boat, the client, beaming captain, and the huge fish, and on it said, largest game fish ever caught in Irish waters. So I said to Veronica, well, I think that does it. That's fine. So that seems to work. So we were very happy about that. And then shortly afterwards, it was at the College of Psychic Studies, they got a phone call from a West African lady who was very irate. She said, my stall at Camden Market is being cursed. I have no customers. All the other people have customers. I have no customers. So we said, all right, we'll go down after we've finished work here. And we went down to Camden Market, met this lovely lady, and said, well, what are you selling? She said, best chicken stew with lots of chili. Very, very good. And I looked at it, it smelled delicious. I thought, well, I'd have to try some of this. But it picked up that the stall had been, or she had been cursed. West Africa, okay. What do we do here? So then I said, right, have you got any empty Coca-Cola bottles? Plastic ones. And have you got any beans? And will you put some beans in to make a rattle? So she did that, and I said, that's great. Now, I'm going to behave a bit strangely because I'm going to ask for a Cameroonian witch doctor to come in to me to clear this curse. So in a roundabout way, we asked the South African witch doctor to speak to the Cameroonian, who then came into me, and I took off around this. It was great fun. The West African lady had big eyes. Veronica was giggling, And after about 15 minutes, I stopped and said, right, I think that's done it. Where's the bin? And threw them into the waste bin. And she said, but those are good beans. I said, no, they're not. If you feed anybody those beans, it'll kill them. Everything's in the beans now. So just let that go. And I said, she said, well, how do I know whether it's worked? And I said, why don't you start serving your customers? He said, what do you mean, customers? And there was a queue. I never got to taste the stew, which was a great shame, but there we were. Anyway, curses. Curses. Let's see what else. Let's put some other things down I want to tell you about. I felt wonderful, very mad, but completely, it was just fun. Because it's very important that you realize that you're never given and you can't cope with. So, for instance, when we opened the doors of a garage and bitter lemons in Cyprus, that was the house where one of the Durrells was writing the Alexandra Quartet, and he always went down to the local pub and sat under the tree with his bottle of wine. He never did any writing at the way he was staying, and I'm sure he needed the wine just to sleep there because it was on an earth fault, and was very stressed. And when we opened the doors, about 30 ghosts came out at us just like hornets. And I remember saying to Veronica, "Oh, whoopee, tennis." And we just had to go like this and just knock them off to the light. But you're never given anything you can't cope with. Okay. Oh, by the way, if anybody's anxious, you know how to release fear, don't you? What's the scariest thing you can do? You ask any man and he'll say, get married. So, wedding ring finger. Can I borrow your hand? Left hand, that one. And this knuckle here. 1, 2, 3. The meridian goes around to the heart. So if you're anxious about anything, you wake up in the middle of the night having horrors or something, just press that and it'll release. There. Okay. 3 squeezes. Don't do it forever and ever. Just, just do it once or twice. That's all you'll need. What was it? Yes. Relevant past lives. Relevant past lives can be quite interesting and very useful. There was a lady who came to see me. Her husband was a banker, and I used to go and see the banker out of hours to help him with questions that he had. And he always knew when to call me because he would drop a particular crystal I'd given him, and I'd have to get another one. And his wife came to see me because she said she was having trouble. She had broken the glass ceiling, and she was a board member. But she said, the trouble is, I'm not very tall, and she was very feminine. She said, the other board members don't think I should be doing anything other than passing around the coffee cups and things. I'm really the token female on the board. But she said, I had this wonderful project, and she said, I told them about it, and they changed the subject and talked about something else. What am I doing wrong? And so I said, well, hang on a minute, because I have a checklist which I go through, and it came up on the checklist with relevant past life. So I said, well, a relevant past life is going to help you. Let's see, what shall we do? Yes, so I had to douse to find out which it was, and it was when she was a female pirate captain in the Caribbean. And afterwards I thought, a lady pirate captain, there aren't any. And there were lots. And they were very tough. 1 or 2 Irish ones amongst them. And anyway, once we determined this and we were talking about it, I was able to take her there. She said, I can feel the deck moving under me. Oh, the power. Oh, she said, gosh, the crew were really terrified of her because if they put it the foot wrong, she would just shoot them all, throw a knife at them, she was just so ruthless. So nobody questioned her. I said, bring that energy back with you. And she said, oh, yes, I can feel that. And I said, now, next time we go into the board meeting, take that energy with you and see whether it helps you. I thought, I don't know what's going to happen, we'll see. She phoned up afterwards, giggling. I said, what happened? And she said, well, I used to go in, the first one in there, and I'd be making sure the coffee pot cups are being put around and so on. But this time I hung back, I was the last in. And instead of going genteelly through one door, she said, I went through the two doors, bang. And she went up to the table with all these gentlemen sitting around, muttering like this, and she took her wad of papers and threw them down on the thing, bang. And they all looked startled. And she said, at last I have your attention. Now I have this proposal. I've told you about it. And Mr. Chairman, I insist that we vote on this now, and I expect it to be carried. All these guys went, okay. And she went and sat down quietly, didn't say anything else. And at the end of the meeting, the chairman said, my dear, would you just wait a minute? So he thinks, well, I'll get in the neck now. And he came up and sat next to her and he said, my dear, you seem strangely changed, but I love it. Okay. Now, I want to cover three other things. One is wands, one is angels, and another one is ghosts. Now, first of all, we never need to be worried about ghosts. Ghosts are just people who don't realize they're dead. And if they are surprised by their death, they sometimes tend to stay with where they feel safe, so they go back home. But then, of course, the house gets sold, and then maybe a family of Sikh taxi drivers move in, and the case in point, the taxi driver was in Maidenhead, and they couldn't understand. They moved into a bigger house. The smaller house, they were always got on so well, and in this bigger house, there was always arguments, and they couldn't understand. So we went to visit, and Veronica sat down on the sofa, waiting for her cup of tea, which was offered, and immediately stood up again and said, well, I've just sat on your problem. I've just sat on the ghost. And this is a gentleman who's died in the house, and he doesn't speak your language, and he's trying to talk to you because he doesn't realize he's dead. So what we do is we ask the loving angels just to lift him to the light. And we usually do that by asking the angels to lift him to the light and take out your pendulum. And as long as it's spinning, that's the time it's taking. Now, some ghosts are a little bit, they're scared. It can be emotional. I remember clearing one sweet girl who'd been used by the master of the house, and she committed suicide. And she was stuck. But when we lifted her to the light, I burst into tears. It was just such a nice energy. But sometimes there was a Greek landowner on Cyprus, and he died. He had about 4 acres of 4 hectares of vines, which is quite a lot. But it was in the Turkish sector, and the Turks sold his land to expatriates. And the expatriates called us in and said, what on earth's going on here? We are being chased the whole time, we're disturbed, there's something. And I said, well, you've got a ghost here. So I took my dowsing rod to follow where the ghost was, and I had to chase it. And I chased it all the way through to the guest room where he couldn't go any further. And I said, well, stop running, just sit down, I want to have a word with you. So I had the ghost sitting in a chair, and I was sitting in a chair. And I said, well, why are you tormenting these people? Oh, it's my land. I said, yes, but you're no longer alive. But I worked so hard for this land. I said, I quite understand that. But this part of Cyprus is now occupied by the Turks. Wouldn't you like to be in a Greek part of the island or a Greek part of Greece? Well, yes, that would be nice. And how many hectares of vines would you like? What? I said, you can have anything you like. How many hectares would you like? 40? Yeah, that's possible. And so you come back, you'll be born into a family who have 40 hectares of vines, and you'll inherit them. What about that? Gone. He went quick as a flash. And so sometimes I don't normally get into conversations because it's usually easier just to ask, should this ghost be here? Because sometimes you have ancestral piles where the ghost is having a lovely time and it's all part of the fabric, if you like, of the place. And sometimes ghosts are very helpful. There was a butler in a hotel, but he had to have his duties redescribed. But once he was told what he had to do, he was then very helpful. Veronica's ghost friend in Ireland, when we moved, the family one day ganged up on me and they said, Dad, we want to move back to England. I said, well, how many of you? Well, all of us. Oh. Because when I moved in there, it was difficult getting the stuff into the place. And I told the movers, they said, it'd be very difficult getting stuff out of here. So you don't need to worry, boys. The only thing that's coming out of here is me in a long box. So I said, oh, right, I've had my dream. We've been over 20 years in Ireland. I've had a lovely time. You all want to go to England. I'm outvoted. Let's go to England. Another adventure. So off we went. Which is... Oh, and so we had Veronica's ghost. So Veronica then said, she was called Lizzie. Lizzie, do you want to go to the light? No, I'm coming with you. We thought this was a bit unusual, but Lizzie came with us to the Vale of Evesham. And then Veronica said, Lizzie, are you going to stay with me until I pass? Oh, no, she said. I'm going to go when the German Shepherd, we had a big German Shepherd who was very protective of Veronica, called Bismarck. When Bismarck goes, I will go with the dog. And that's what happened. Quite extraordinary. The other thing I wanted to mention is, please remember to work with angels. I'm sure you all have a parking angel, don't you? And that works very well, doesn't it? As long as you remember to ask beforehand. And I remember on one occasion Veronica had asked for a parking space in Evesham, and we drove around the corner because this parking space was just outside our curry house, and somebody had just driven into our parking space, and Veronica said, they're taking our parking space, whereupon they drove away again. So you can always ask for angels to assist, and you can have angels for any I was describing earlier, I have an outrider. When the weather's bad, I was driving back from London, and I suddenly noticed there was a motorbike in the fast lane with the fellow waving to me to catch him up, like following me at the airport, and he had one of these flapping Macs. And I looked at it again. It looked about 1915 or something like this. But it was pouring rain, so I just followed him. I put my foot down and went up the fast lane, and pouring rain, 80 miles an hour, got home very early. It's been there ever since. But not for everybody. There's an angel for everything. So if you play golf, you can always ask for a golfing angel to assist you, but I would suggest a professional. If you play bowls, you can ask for a bowling angel to assist you. Okay. And if you need to have more friends, you can ask for a networking angel to assist you. It all works, you just have to ask. But if you don't ask, you don't get. Okay. Right. Yeah. Shall I show you a wand? Would you like to give me one of those wands from the back there, please? The one with a crystal on the end. A wand there with a crystal. Thank you very much, thank you. No, that's not a good. That's got a bead on the end. That's a bobber. A bobber. And the wand is the one with crystal. Thank you. That's the one. And that one's got a little crystal on the end. Now a bobber is very useful for finding. Please show me a yes, please show me a no. You see that? Yes? No? Okay. It's very useful for finding earth energies, measuring the energies of mounds and cumuli and all sorts of wonderful things, because it all alternates and it's all flowing across the landscape. But this one has got a crystal in the end. And I came across these. There was a meeting of the Dowsing research group up in Snowdonia, and they wanted to do experiments to prove how dowsing worked. And I said to Veronica, I think we better go and see what these guys are up to. Because, as you know, you can't do replicated trials with dowsing because you have to trust your first answer. You can't repeat it. If you do repeat it, you'll end up with a joker. It'll mess you around with your energies. So, and we realized, were doing quite harmless things. They had a pipe, garden hose, and they were turning on the tap and turning it off and getting people to douse and see whether they got a signal to pick up the water or not. And they were ticking it off and collecting numbers, and all very normal stuff. Except that Johnny Cunningham, I don't know whether any of you know Johnny Cunningham, he's long dead now, but he was an old Etonian with a monocle, major in the army. And he was a bit of a joker, because what he was doing was sitting there and saying, water flow, when it was switched off. And so he was messing up all the experiments. And Johnny, one of his nicest tricks was improving the quality of the wine. There was a rather showy offy guy in a restaurant, and Johnny was sitting in the corner. And this fellow was going on and on, talking to the wine waiter, and the wine waiter was almost raising his eyes to the heaven. Anyway, he ordered a very nice bottle of Chateau something. And in the other corner, there was a couple of kids who were seeing how much money they could, to see whether they could afford any bottle of wine. So when the wine was brought out, Johnny pointed at the wine that was given to the kids and said, Chateau Yfet, and gave a year. So when the kids tasted their wine, they looked very surprised because it was such a good quality. And the other one who'd ordered this very expensive wine, he just corked. And the tasted and said, oh, it's corked. Yeah, so very naughty. But anyway, that's why we were there. And at the coffee break, my wife and I went out into the gardens, and a short lady, about 5 foot, dressed in leathers with Doc Martin boots, came up, and she had a quiver as for arrows, and she produced this and stuck it under my nose. Would you buy one of these? With a deep voice. And I said, yes, well, what do you use them for? And she said, well, any profit I make, I send to southern India, to Father Kempton, to find water. And I said, yes, but what do you use them for? She said, well, I'm a retired architect. And she said, but I still do the odd, sign off the odd building. And she said, I can't be hacked climbing ladders anymore, so I just go along checking the brickwork. And if it says it's not very good there, she will say to the builder, I'll sign it off as soon as you've taken that corner down 14 bricks and reinstated it, and then I'll sign it off. And I said, surely the builder argues. She said, only the first time. And so that seemed to work all right for her. Anyway, I said, well, I don't do much of that. And there's a little book at the back telling you what she uses it for, or used them for, and I've copied them so that anybody who buys a wand can have a copy of those. as she was standing there, the wand started going like this, and it was pointing in the direction of my left knee. And I said, what's happening? She said, well, he doesn't like your knee. And I said, well, two of us, because I couldn't drive. I had this once before. It was like water on the knee, but I cured that by putting it in a healing trough of water in Austria. We were walking on a path, and I saw this, and I said, oh, I'll stick my knee in because I was limping. And the others went on. And after 20 minutes, I was crying because it was so cold. And I put my trousers back on and ran and caught them up. Wonderful. Anyway, so this wand was taken off. I said, well, I couldn't drive here. Veronica drove and I navigated. And after a time, it stopped. And I said, well, what happens now? She said, try your knee. So I did knee bends and all sorts of things. I said, wow, I'll buy 3 of those. And I bought 3, threw them into my briefcase and forgot about them until sometime later, Veronica was doing a workshop in Regent's College. And on a Saturday, and I went with her, helped her set up, walked across the park to the Hale Clinic, saw my clients there, and then came back and helped her pack up. And when I came back, she said, I have a client for you. And there was a very large woman. She looked rather like Jabba the Hutt, you know, she was really a big lady. And I said, I can see you next Saturday. No, 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 she said, you don't understand. I'm in agony. I can't walk on my ankle and my foot, it hurts so much. And I said, well, what did you do? Did you walk here today? She said, yes. And I said, you normally drive? Yes, but I'm going on a walking holiday in Austria tomorrow. And she said, I thought I'd better have some practice. I said, in London streets, not a good idea. No, she said, I know that now. What are you going to do about it? So I said, oh, okay. So I opened my case and pulled out one of these. And said, I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll see. And I just held it opposite her foot and it started bouncing around. Okay, and after a time it stopped. Meanwhile, Veronica's workshop had collapsed and they were all standing around wanting to know what's going to happen. And the lady stood up, walked across the room and said, that's very nice, thank you. And she sent us a postcard from Austria saying, foot still okay. So very useful for hips, knees, backs, ankles, tennis elbow, things like that. So I'll just show you one of you. If anybody got a problem with anywhere? Yes? Sorry? Well, you've had it replaced, but anyway, we can see whether we can help. There, your hips, you choose. You can have both if you like. Okay, so we ask for this to be cleansed, and then you turn around this way, and you put, so people can see. You put this hand up here across your breast. There we are, so I don't hit it with the crystal, because otherwise if your hand was down, I would hit it with the crystal, and you'd have to be rushed off to A&E because it's rather sharp. Okay. All right, so should we try here? Can we? May we? Should we? Yes, okay. And all we do is see what happens. I don't know what happens. I get myself out of the way, and the wand just takes off. If anybody wants a wand, for a small blue note, you can have one. There at the back there. I will tell you. Can I just finish this first? Is that your... That's not the replaced one, is it? Oh, okay. The other way, yeah. The hand up, there we are. It goes plus all over the place and then settles down. And this one may collapse because it's creaking. You hear that? You can ask it to be less vigorous. It's going to positive. I said it may come to pieces. Can you give me another one? You can. No, I'm just, yes, I did this thing. I tried to get out of the way. Well, I'm glad one of us does. I don't, so I'm very glad one of us does. If you want to do this for yourself, it is difficult because you cannot reach your arm around to that side. So it's much better to ask another dowser. Even if you get a short one, it's still tricky. The other thing you can do is stand opposite the mirror and do it on the mirror image. It's not quite as effective as directly. The same using a surrogate. You can use somebody else as a surrogate for you. But again, it's not so... I'm just demonstrating. I'm not concerned about whether it's going to work or not, but we can ask you whether it feels any different. Do you feel anything? Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you. Welcome. So there we are. This one has to go back and be redone. So there we are. Okay. Cleanse, please. Cleanse. Ask for it to be cleansed. Cleanse beforehand, cleanse afterwards. This one has a little crystal in the end. You can use it as a bobber. It's not quite so good for healing. That's what I find. Yeah, but this one you can do the same. You can do the same with your pendulum or whatever. But I find this a little bit easier for going out and checking standing stones and things like this. Also because it's safer. Okay. The other ones have a crystal in the end, and this one has a little bead. These were collected off necklaces in charity shops. You dowse for which ones you use. Okay. The same with the crystal, you dowse which ones you're going to select. Right. How are we doing? Can I keep going? Okay, right. Does anybody want to ask anything? Whilst I just have a quick slug of my tea.
The only thing I can think of from what you've been saying is next time you're at a funeral, crematorium is typical. Ask if there are any lost souls there. You usually try to get answers to 2 or 3. And you'll find that you can't send them to the light because they are actually there to help other lost souls. And it's rather nice actually. You've got no proof, you just ask the question, you get an answer. And it's something to do when you're at a in the service, and just make it work.
The other thing is at a funeral, if you look around and relax, often as not, you can see the person, the deceased. And they're usually there to have a look and see who's turned up. Kate came in on the top of her casket, which was woven basket, and was sitting there with her thick boots on, laughing. A friend of mine recently, he was sitting up in the gallery, and the family were all sort of standing there. I said, "Don't look down, look up to the left," because he was up there, just looking at everybody, laughing his head off. So, and but another one, she wasn't there. I thought, "Where are you?" "Oh, can't be fussed with all this nonsense." Sorry? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Quite. I talk to trees, or we talk to trees, I'm sure most of you do. I always say to my friends in London, whatever you do, touch a plane tree every day if you can, because it earths you, and it is very, very powerful. Oaks are a little bit grumpy, but they will tell you a lot about what has gone on, where they've been growing. So they'll tell you exactly what's been going on. Some trees, though, I can never have a conversation with a copper beech. No, just won't refuse to converse with me or my wife, but maybe others of you have different experiences. Rowan trees, however, are very useful. You know, little rowan tree. Yeah. There was a lady who had a very busy life in London, and so she bought a bothy up in Scotland. You know what I mean by a bothy? Very simple stone building. Only this one had no roof, no windows, no doors, just the stone. And she got it very cheaply, and she just wanted to have the single room, so when she got too tired in London, she could just go up there for a couple of weeks, quietly, on her own. But she found local carpenters and so on, and they all agreed to do what she needed doing, but nothing happened. And after a couple of years, she came and had a word with us and said, well, what do you get? And I said, well, it's been cursed. Because when there's the land clearance, when people were removed from the land, you know, there was a big clearance up in Scotland, they wanted to replace crofters with sheep and deer and birds. And so the people who were evicted, they turned around and cursed the place for anybody who wanted to take it over from them. So I said, well, you'll need to clear that. And she said, well, how do we do that? And I said, well, ritual is the servant of intent. So what you do is take a little, half bottle of whiskey will do. And when you get to the place again, you pour a small libation onto where the door opens, where your main door is, and say, I reclaim this property on behalf of those who are dispossessed. And then you go in with some peat and light a fire, and you announce that, well, as long as you're there, the fire will burn. And if anybody wants to come in from the cold and warm themselves by the fire, they're most welcome. And then to go out of there, go round the building clockwise, and I said you will find a rowan tree up to the right of the corner. And she said, there's no tree there. I said, you will find a rowan tree in the corner, because I doubted that there was a rowan tree there. And I said, if you don't find one, never mind, but I think you will find one there. And you go round the rowan tree 7 times, and I got her to sing a little ballad as she went round the tree. I said, that's all you have to do. And she said, well, I don't believe it. And I said, nor do I, but give it a go, see what happens. And she came back, and she said, there was a rowan tree there. She said, as soon as I finished, the next day, the carpenters and everybody turned up. And she said it was all done before I came back down. So there's a wreck in the bay of Tobermory, and some treasure hunters said to me, could you pinpoint where the wreck is? And I said, well, we can have a go. So they came with some charts. And then I said, right. I don't think you're going to find the wreck, and I don't think I am, until we go and have a word with the witches on the headland opposite Tobermory. And I told them what to do, because they had seen the boat sink, and they had put on a protection so nobody would find it. But I don't think they ever did what I told them. So it's still lying there, probably full of doubloons or whatever. I should mention something about loss, that which is lost. we can just dowse because we can't find our car key, especially if we remember to dowse when we can't find the car key. But however, sometimes there's a message involved, and we're not going to find the object until we have the message. And all you have to dowse is, if you've lost something, oh, is there a message involved? Yes, no. And if there is, then you find the message. And just to remind you again, is it something on a physical level, emotional level, psychic level? Is it something to know, something to do, or something to ask? Give you an example. There was a young lady who she became 18, and her mother said, you're 18 now, darling. Now's the time for you to have the family pearls. So the mother gave her the pearl necklace and pearl earrings, which had been her grandmother's. And she'd had them at 18 and passed them on. And the mother was starting a family tradition because she said, and before grandmother, she said, nothing before grandmother. And so she said, you don't have to wear them except at family occasions. Do wear them anytime you like, but especially when we have a family get-together, please wear them. So she was very pleased about this, and some months later, mother phoned up and said, we're having a birthday party for so-and-so, and it's a family occasion, don't forget the pearls. Yes, Mummy, that would be lovely. So she went to her bedroom and looked in the drawer where she kept the little case which had the pearls in, opened it up, there was the necklace, but no earrings. And she was panic-stricken. And she thought, well, nobody's been in there. Anyway, she asked somebody, and somebody else asked somebody else, and in the end she phoned. And she'd been told to phone, and that was what happened. And I said, well, your earrings are not stolen. They're in the house, but we've got to find the message. And the message was very simple. It was to tell her that her granny was with her. So I said, well, your granny's with you, because we dowsed for going through those items. And she said, that's lovely. And I said, all you've got to do is say, hi, Granny. So she said, hi, Granny. And she said, well, where's the earrings? And I said, well, you're a taster, aren't you? You like chocolate. And she said, yes, but what's that got to do with it? And she said, actually, I do like chocolate very much. My figure reflects it. I said, well, as you go through the house, it's upstairs, your mouth will suddenly fill up with water, as if with saliva, as if you're going to eat some chocolate or something. Look around there. And she said, why are you telling me to do that? I said, because that's your dominant sense. You know, we have 5 senses besides the 6th sense, which we've been talking about today. In other words, touching, feeling, seeing, hearing, smelling, and tasting. So, okay. Anyway, she phoned up next day, giggling, said, well, I found the earrings. And I said, where? And she said, well, I was walking down the corridor, and just outside the guest room, my mouth filled up with saliva, and I remembered what you said, so I went into the guest room. But our guest room is completely empty. The wardrobe is empty, so anybody who wants to stay there. I said, well, gosh, that's not like mine. Okay. But she said, on the back of the door was a man's shirt. And she said, I don't know what that was doing there. So she said she took it off and thought, this is very strange. She hadn't had any men staying there. And but as she did that, she was aware there was something in the breast pocket. So she went to see what it was, and there was the earrings. Now, how Granny got them out of the box into the shirt, I have no idea. But there they were. So, strange. Very strange. Just showing that Granny was definitely around, yes. We? It doesn't matter at all. For instance, this morning I was helping a lady find her ginger cat, which she'd just been given, and it had escaped and gone out. And she was worried about it. And I said, well, there's no need to be for me to come. Your cat is where it likes to be out hunting, so let it enjoy it, and it'll eventually come back. So, but if you're there, yes, but you can sometimes get confused with what is around. There was a nice. Always ask whether the dog or the cat wants to be found, because often these animals don't. And so they might want to join the cat's nightclub, or they're never been let out of the house, so they get an opportunity to go and they go. It can be a new animal moving into the territory, which also cats go and feed in each other's homes. And the owners are not aware that the strange cat is coming in, but the cat that's there may feel threatened and may leave. So you get all these combinations. And the same with people. You don't want to go chasing after something because you've seen it in the headline in the paper. You have to wait until a family member or somebody asks you. Because if you can throw any light on the case, who's going to be number one suspect? The person who has this information as if out by magic from somewhere.